The pen was heavier than it should have been. Or maybe that was just my heart, sinking into my stomach as I watched black ink bleed across the divorce papers. At my best friend's wedding reception of all places. Around me, champagne glasses clinked and laughter echoed off the crystal chandeliers of the Grand Belmore Hotel. Chelsea's white dress sparkled under the lights as she danced with her new husband, while I sat in a corner booth signing away what I thought was a failed marriage. Joe stood over me, his expensive cologne suffocating, his Rolex catching the light as he tapped the pages impatiently. Just sign, Nicole. Let's not make this harder than it needs to be. My hands trembled as I flipped through the papers. 47 pages of legal jargon that made my head pound. The migraines had been getting worse lately, the confusion thicker, like I was moving through fog. Chelsea had told me it was stress, that divorce did this to people. She'd given me vitamins, held my hand through therapy sessions, been the friend I desperately needed after the accident 3 years ago left me with gaps in my memory I could never quite fill. I signed my name on the final page just as the DJ announced the bouquet toss. Chelsea's eyes found mine across the room, and something flickered there, something I was too numb to identify. The bouquet flew through the air and hit me square in the face as guests erupted in laughter. The woman getting divorced at a wedding. How pathetic. I gathered my purse and stumbled toward the exit, but not before I glanced back through the venue windows. Joe and Chelsea stood close together, too close, their lips meeting in a kiss that lasted far too long to be innocent. My stomach turned, but I told myself I was imagining things. The medication Dr. Ramon prescribed made me paranoid sometimes. Before we dive deeper into Nicole's story, I need to ask you something as a friend. This channel is built on support from amazing people like you, and every like and subscription genuinely helps us bring you more stories like this one. If you're enjoying Nicole's journey so far, would you take just 2 seconds to hit that like button and subscribe? It truly makes a difference, and I'm so grateful for each one of you. Also, I'm really curious. Where are you watching from right now? Drop your city or state in the comments. I love knowing where our community is tuning in from. Now, what I didn't know as I drove away from that wedding, tears streaming down my face, was that I hadn't just signed divorce papers. Buried in page 47, in language designed to confuse, was a clause transferring all patent rights, company shares, and intellectual property to Joe Wellington. I didn't know that the trembling in my hands wasn't from stress, but from 3 years of systematic poisoning. I didn't know that my best friend had been microdosing me with benzodiazepines disguised as vitamins, that my therapist wasn't licensed, that my accident was actually attempted murder. And I definitely didn't know that I wasn't Nicole David, the orphan nobody who married above her station. I was Dr. Nicole David, MIT-educated biochemist, creator of Neural Restore, a $4.7 billion cancer treatment that Joe was now claiming as his own invention. I didn't know then that I wasn't signing away a marriage. I was signing away my entire life. But they didn't know something either. You can bury a woman's memories, drug her mind, and steal her identity. But you can't kill what's written in her cells. And my cells, they were about to remember everything. I drove back to my apartment in a daze. Marcus Chen's horrified face burned into my mind. Dr. David, CFO, the Wellington theft. Words that should have meant nothing, but somehow felt like keys trying to unlock doors I didn't know existed. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles went white, and that rash on my arm seemed to pulse and burn with each heartbeat. The apartment building looked wrong as I pulled into the parking lot. Had it always been this rundown? Peeling paint on the exterior, weeds pushing through cracks in the pavement. Joe had moved me here after the accident, said our old house had too many stairs for my condition, that I needed somewhere simple while I recovered. I'd never questioned it. I'd never questioned anything. The door stuck as I pushed it open. It always did. And I stepped into the dim studio that had been my home for 3 years. But today, standing in the doorway with Marcus Chen's words echoing in my head, I really looked at it. A Murphy bed that never folded up quite right. A kitchenette with 2 burners. Thrift store furniture that didn't match. Not a single photograph on the walls. I walked slowly to the closet, pulled open the door, and stared at clothes I didn't remember buying. Oversized sweaters in colors I didn't like. Worn jeans with someone else's faded stains. Nothing fit properly. Nothing felt like mine. My breathing quickened as I yanked open the desk drawer. Old bills, takeout menus, a lease agreement I'd apparently signed but had no memory of signing. I tore through the bathroom cabinet next. Generic shampoo. Cheap makeup I never wore. And there, behind a box of bandages, the amber bottle Chelsea had given me 2 weeks ago. For your headaches, babe. All natural, I promise. I held the bottle up to the light, studying the unmarked white pills inside. No label. No pharmacy information. Just Chelsea's sweet voice insisting they'd help. My hands were shaking again as I grabbed my phone and typed the description into Google. The results loaded slowly, each second stretching into eternity. Benzodiazepines. Prescription sedatives. Side effects. Memory loss, confusion, tremors, skin rashes, dependency. The phone slipped from my hand and clattered to the floor. Chelsea had been drugging me. My best friend. The woman who'd held me while I cried about my failing marriage. Who'd driven me to therapy appointments. Who'd just gotten married while I signed away my life in the corner of her reception hall. A sound escaped my throat. Half laugh, half sob, as I sank to the bathroom floor. Nothing made sense, but somehow everything was starting to. That's when I saw it. The closet door had swung fully open when I'd torn through my clothes, and in the back corner, barely visible behind a broken storage bin, was a small metal lockbox I'd never noticed before. I crawled across the floor and pulled it out, my heart hammering. It was locked, but the mechanism looked cheap. I grabbed a hairpin from the counter and worked it into the keyhole with fingers that wouldn't stop trembling. The lock clicked open. Inside was a flash drive labeled backup, before in handwriting that looked like mine but somehow wasn't. A photograph of me. Actually me, but different, confident, smiling, standing between 2 elderly people I'd never seen before. And a hospital bracelet, white plastic with faded blue text. Nicole David, age 29, admission date. 4 years ago. 6 months before the accident that had stolen my memory. 6 months before my life had supposedly begun. I sat on the cold bathroom floor clutching that hospital bracelet like it was a lifeline to a person I couldn't remember being. The date stamped on it was from 4 years ago. 6 months before the car accident that Joe said had changed everything, before the memory loss, before I became this trembling shell of a woman who couldn't even recognize her own apartment as a prison. The photograph trembled in my other hand. The woman in it stood straight and tall, wearing a crisp white blouse and tailored pants, her hair styled in a sleek bun. She was me, but she wasn't. Her eyes were bright and focused, her smile genuine and unmedicated. She looked like someone who knew exactly who she was. The 2 elderly people flanking her had kind faces. The man wore round glasses and had his arm around her shoulders. The woman held her hand. They looked like family. They looked like love. But I had no family. Joe had told me I was an orphan, raised in foster care, alone in the world until I met him. I turned the photo over with shaking fingers. On the back, in that same confident handwriting that looked like mine but felt foreign, were 3 words. Mom, Dad, me. The sob that tore from my throat was so violent it hurt. I had parents. I had parents and I couldn't remember their faces, couldn't remember their names, couldn't remember anything except the story Joe had fed me about being abandoned as a child. How many times had I cried on his shoulder about feeling so alone in the world? How many times had he comforted me? All while knowing he'd stolen my entire history. The flash drive felt heavy in my palm, loaded with possibilities and terrors in equal measure. I couldn't open it here. Couldn't risk using my laptop. The one Joe had bought me after the accident, set up for me, probably monitored. I grabbed my keys and the lockbox contents, shoved them deep into my purse, and headed for the door. The public library was only 10 minutes away. A sprawling brick building I'd walked past 100 times, but never entered. Inside, the reference librarian barely glanced at me as I signed up for a computer station in the back corner, as far from prying eyes as possible. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely plug in the flash drive. The screen flickered to life and folder after folder appeared. Patent applications, research notes, financial records, video diaries, and one folder labeled simply, The Truth About Joe. I clicked on the video diaries first, my cursor hovering over a file dated 1 week before my supposed accident. The video opened and there I was, the same woman from the photograph, but exhausted now, dark circles under her eyes, hair pulled back hastily. She looked directly into the camera, directly at me across time, and spoke. If you're watching this, something has happened to me. If you're watching this and you don't remember making it, then he succeeded. Her voice, my voice, was steady despite the fear in her eyes. My name is Dr. Nicole David. I have a PhD in biochemistry from MIT. I created NeuroRestore, a revolutionary cancer treatment, using my parents' research after they died. I founded a company to bring it to market, and I made the mistake of marrying a man named Joe Wellington. She paused, glancing off camera as if checking to make sure she was alone. Joe has been pressuring me for months to add his name to the patents. He says we're married, what's mine is his, that he deserves credit for supporting me. But he's done nothing except spend my money and resent my success. Last week, I told him I wanted a divorce. Yesterday, he made me coffee and I started feeling strange. I didn't drink at all, but my mouth went numb and her face filled with fresh terror. If anything happens to me, know this. I didn't add Joe's name to the patents. I don't care how much he begs. This is my work, my mother's legacy. And Joe Wellington is not the man I thought he was. He's been. The screen erupted into static, the video corrupting into digital noise. I clicked frantically, trying to recover it, but it was gone. The woman on the screen, me, Dr. Nicole David, vanished into pixels and silence, leaving me alone in a library basement, staring at proof that my entire life was a lie. I watched that corrupted video 17 times. 17 times I studied the curve of my own jaw, the way my eyes moved when I was thinking, the confident tone in my voice that sounded nothing like the timid whisper I'd been speaking in for 3 years. Each time, I tried to will the static away, tried to hear what came after he's been. But the universe wouldn't give me that mercy. By the 8th viewing, I'd started taking notes on everything visible in the background. A laboratory setting, equipment I couldn't name, but somehow recognized. A periodic table on the wall. A framed photograph, too blurry to make out clearly. By the 13th viewing, I was crying silently, tears dripping onto the library keyboard as I mourned a woman I'd never known but had apparently been. I forced myself to close the video and open the patent applications. The first one made my breath catch. NeuroRestore, a novel approach to neural regeneration in cancer treatment. Filed 4 years ago. Inventor, Dr. Nicole David, PhD. The technical language should have been incomprehensible. Complex molecular formulas, treatment protocols, clinical trial designs. But as my eyes scanned the pages, something terrifying happened. I understood it. Not just understood. I could see the flaws in the methodology, the places where the dosing could be optimized, the way the compound could be stabilized for longer shelf life. The knowledge was there, buried under 3 years of fog and medication, waiting. My hands moved to the keyboard without conscious thought, and I opened a blank document. Started typing. If we increase the compound concentration to 0.03 molar and introduce a phosphate buffer at pH 7.4, we could improve bioavailability by approximately 23% while reducing. I stopped, staring at the words I'd written, medical terminology flowing from my fingers like I'd been using it my whole life. Because I had been using it. I had been Dr. Nicole David. The emails were worse. Correspondence with venture capitalists, discussing investment rounds worth millions. Negotiations with pharmaceutical companies. My signature on contracts establishing something called David Biotech, later renamed Wellington Pharma. The name change happened 3 years ago, right after my accident, right after I'd forgotten I owned it. I clicked on the financial records folder, and my stomach dropped. The company was valued at $4.7 billion. $4.7 billion. NeuroRestore had been approved by the FDA 18 months ago and was revolutionizing cancer treatment worldwide. And according to every document dated after my accident, Joe Wellington was listed as founder and primary patent holder. My name appeared nowhere. I'd been erased from my own life's work. I'd been turned into a ghost while the man I'd married stole everything, including my identity. The research notes were in my handwriting. I'd compared them obsessively to the grocery lists in my apartment, and they matched. Pages and pages of calculations, observations, breakthrough moments documented in excited scrawls. Mom would be so proud. The compound is finally stable. One note read, dated 5 years ago. Another from 4 years back. First successful trial in mice. 87% tumor reduction with 0 toxicity. This is going to change everything. And then more recent, from just before the accident. Joe is becoming unbearable. He actually suggested I was lucky to have his business expertise, when he's contributed nothing. The prenup protects my IP, but he's getting aggressive about it. Maybe Chelsea is right, and I should just cut my losses. Chelsea. My best friend who'd handed me sedatives disguised as vitamins. My best friend who'd kissed my husband at her wedding. My best friend who'd watched me sign away everything without saying a word. I don't know how long I sat there, the library fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, reading through the fragments of a life that should have been mine. Around me, people checked out books and used computers and lived their normal lives while mine splintered into pieces. When I finally looked up, it was dark outside the windows. 4 hours had passed. 4 hours of meeting a stranger who shared my face, my fingerprints, my DNA, but not my memories. I ejected the flash drive with trembling fingers and sat in the blue glow of the computer screen, trying to figure out what you do when you discover you've been living someone else's lie. The answer came to me with crystal clarity. You find out the truth. All of it, no matter how much it destroys you. The police station smelled like burnt coffee and institutional disinfectant. I stood at the front desk, clutching my driver's license, and asked for a copy of my accident report from 3 years ago. The officer behind the plexiglass, a middle-aged woman with tired eyes and graying hair pulled back tight, looked at me, then at my ID, then back at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. You've requested this before, ma'am, she said slowly, her fingers hovering over her keyboard. 3 times, actually. Once about 2 years ago, then again 18 months ago, and once more last year. The floor seemed to tilt beneath my feet. What? No, I haven't. This is my first time here. She turned her monitor toward me, and there they were, 3 previous requests, each with my signature, dates spanning the last 2 years. Signatures that looked like mine, the shaky, uncertain scrawl I'd been using since the accident. I'd been here before. I'd tried to find the truth before. And somehow I'd forgotten. How many times had I gotten close? How many times had they, Joe, Chelsea, Dr. Rahman, pulled me back into the fog? The officer printed the report without another word, perhaps recognizing the dawning horror on my face. I took it to my car with trembling hands and read it under the dome light. Vehicle left Route 16 at approximately 11:47 p.m. Driver found unconscious at the scene. Blood alcohol content, 0.12%. Cause, driver impairment. No witnesses. But I didn't drink. Even now, with 3 years of false memories, I knew that instinctively. The thought of alcohol made my stomach turn. I'd never had a taste for it, never wanted it, though I couldn't remember why. Past Nicole didn't drink either. I knew this the way you know your own heartbeat. The report was a lie. But who would believe the woman with documented memory problems and a history of requesting the same report over and over? I drove straight to a private investigator's office I found online, a small storefront squeezed between a dry cleaner and a nail salon. Inside, a man in his 50s with silver stubble and sharp eyes introduced himself as Ray Kowalski, former state police detective. I showed him everything. The flash drive contents, the hospital bracelet, the accident report, the bottle of pills from Chelsea. I showed him the bank statements I'd found documenting an account with $47,000 in it that I'd never known existed. Use whatever you need from this, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. I need to know what really happened to me. Ray studied me for a long moment, the kind of look that sees through bullshit and broken people alike. I'll be honest with you, Ms. David. This looks bad. Real bad. Give me a week. He called me 4 days later. We met at a diner off the highway, far from anywhere Joe might see us. Ray slid a folder across the cracked Formica table, his expression grim. The crash site has no skid marks consistent with braking, he said without preamble. You went off the road at full speed, like you never even tried to stop. Your car's computer system was completely replaced after the accident. The shop said it was damaged in the crash, but they replaced the whole thing, which is unusual. I talked to the attending EMT who responded that night. He paused, let that sink in. Guy's retired now, but he remembered the call. Said something always bothered him about it. The husband, Joe Wellington, showed up at the hospital before the ambulance even left the scene. The EMT said Joe seemed more concerned about recovering your phone and laptop from the vehicle than about your injuries. Kept asking if they'd secured your belongings, if anything had been taken from the car. Ray leaned forward, his voice dropping. Ms. David, I think your husband tried to kill you. And when you survived, he found another way to destroy you. Ray wasn't finished. He pulled another document from his folder. This one older, photocopied from what looked like marriage records. "There's something else you need to know," he said, sliding it across the table. Joe Wellington was married before, to a woman named Rebecca Chun. My coffee went cold in my hands. Joe had told me I was his first real love, his only marriage, that he'd never found anyone worth committing to until me. Another lie in an ocean of them. He told me she died. I whispered, though I didn't remember him ever actually saying it. Just the implication, the way he'd brush off questions about past relationships with a sad, distant look. Ray shook his head slowly. "She's not dead. She's in Riverside Psychiatric Facility in Oregon. Diagnosed with early-onset Alzheimer's at 34 years old." The coincidence hit me like a physical blow. Memory loss. Just like me. "Marcus Chun," I said suddenly. "The man who called me Dr. David at the coffee shop. Chun. Is he?" "Her younger brother," Ray confirmed. "He's been trying to get her released for 2 years, but she's been deemed incompetent to make her own medical decisions. The attending physician won't release her without family consent, and legally, her medical proxy is." "Joe," I finished, my voice hollow. "Her ex-husband is her medical proxy." Ray nodded. "Signed over during the divorce proceedings, apparently. Marcus has been fighting it in court, but these things take time. I was on a plane to Portland the next morning, using money from that secret account, carrying nothing but my purse and the photograph of me with my parents. Riverside Psychiatric Facility sat on a gray hillside surrounded by manicured lawns that looked too perfect, too controlled. Inside, everything was beige and quiet, and smelled like antiseptic trying to cover something worse. The nurse at the desk was reluctant until I mentioned Marcus Chen's name, said he'd authorized my visit. It was a lie, but she didn't check. Rebecca Chun sat in a common room by a window, staring out at nothing. She was small, delicate, with short dark hair that looked like someone else had cut it. She wore soft clothes in institutional gray, and her hands rested motionless in her lap. When I sat down across from her, she didn't look at me at first. "Rebecca," I said softly. "My name is Nicole. I was married to Joe Wellington too." Her head turned slowly, and when her eyes met mine, I saw it. That same fog, that same confusion, that same lost quality I'd been seeing in my own reflection for 3 years. "I know you," she said, her voice hesitant. "I don't know how, but I know you." I pulled out my phone, showed her Joe's photo from a company website. The scream that tore from her throat brought 2 nurses running. She was sobbing, shaking, pointing at the screen with a trembling finger. Him. He did this. He did this to me." The nurses tried to calm her, but Rebecca grabbed my hand with surprising strength, her eyes suddenly clear and focused. "He married me for my code," she said through tears, words tumbling out like she'd been holding them for years. "I was a software engineer. I developed an algorithm for pharmaceutical distribution, for tracking drug efficacy in real time. He said he loved me. He said we were partners." Her grip tightened. Then I started forgetting things. Little things at first, where I put my keys, what I'd eaten for breakfast. Then bigger things. Entire days. Marcus tried to help, but Joe isolated me from him. Said Marcus was jealous of our happiness. And then one day I woke up here. She looked around the facility with haunted eyes. "They told me I'd signed myself in. Showed me papers with my signature. But I don't remember. I don't remember any of it." I was crying now too, holding this stranger's hand, seeing my own future in her medicated eyes. "What does he have?" I asked. "What did he take from you?" Rebecca's laugh was broken, bitter. "Everything. My code runs his entire company infrastructure now. Wellington Pharma. He got the patent rights in the divorce, said I wasn't competent to manage my own intellectual property. And I believed him because I couldn't remember creating it." She looked at me then, really looked at me, and her voice dropped to a whisper. "You have the eyes. The lost eyes. What did he take from you?" I told her. Everything. The cancer treatment, the company, the billions, my parents, my memories, my entire identity. When I finished, Rebecca was nodding slowly, tears streaming down her face. "We're not the first," she said. "And we won't be the last. Not unless someone stops him." I was back in my apartment, staring at Rebecca's face in the visitor photo the facility had taken of us together, when someone knocked on my door. 3 sharp raps that made my heart jump. I wasn't expecting anyone. Joe didn't have a key anymore. I'd changed the locks the day after the divorce was finalized. And I had no friends left besides Chelsea, who I now knew had been systematically poisoning me. I looked through the peephole and saw a woman I recognized. Short, asymmetrical haircut, multiple ear piercings, dressed in all black. The wedding photographer from Chelsea's reception. My hand hesitated on the deadbolt. "Ms. David," she called through the door. "My name is Simone Park. I'm not actually a photographer. I'm an investigative journalist. Marcus Chun hired me a year ago to look into what happened to his sister. Please, I think we can help each other." I opened the door a crack, keeping the chain engaged. "How did you find me?" Simone held up a business card, legitimate press credentials from a publication I recognized. "I've been following you since the wedding. I know how that sounds, but I needed to see if you'd start remembering on your own. When you met with Ray Kowalski and then flew to Oregon, I knew you were finally piecing it together." She met my eyes with an intensity that was almost uncomfortable. "I have evidence. A lot of it. Can I come in?" 5 minutes later, my coffee table was covered in photographs, financial records, and a laptop playing surveillance footage I couldn't believe existed. Simone worked with the efficiency of someone who'd done this 100 times, laying out a case that made my blood run cold. "Joe and Chelsea," she said, spreading out a series of photos. "These go back 4 years. Before your accident, while you were still married to him." The images were damning. Joe and Chelsea at a restaurant, holding hands across the table. Joe and Chelsea entering a hotel together. Joe and Chelsea kissing in a parking garage, Chelsea's hand on his chest, his hand in her hair. The timestamps were all from 4 years ago, when I was apparently still Dr. Nicole David, still running my company, still blissfully unaware my husband was sleeping with my best friend and roommate. Chelsea started purchasing benzodiazepines from an online pharmacy 3 years ago, Simone continued, pulling up records on her laptop. Monthly orders, always to a P.O. box, always paid in cash through money orders. The timing coincides exactly with when you started experiencing memory problems. She clicked to another file. "And this is your therapist, Dr. Rahman." The video showed a man I recognized, the kind voice who'd been treating my anxiety for 3 years. Meeting Joe in a parking lot. Joe handed him an envelope. They shook hands. The date stamp read 6 months after my accident. "Rahman isn't a licensed therapist," Simone said flatly. "He's a former pharmaceutical sales rep who lost his license for taking kickbacks. Joe has been paying him to keep you medicated, confused, and convinced you're mentally ill." My hands were shaking so badly I had to sit down. Simone's voice softened slightly as she pulled out the final piece of evidence, a stack of patent applications. Wellington Pharma is valued at $4.7 billion. Its flagship drug, NeuroRestore, was patented 4 years ago. The original patent application lists Nicole David, you, as the sole inventor. She laid out 2 documents side by side. Then 3 years ago, 1 month after your accident, an amendment was filed. Your signature, transferring primary ownership to Joe Wellington. She pointed to the signatures, pulled out examples of my real handwriting from the flash drive. "Nicole, it's forged. Badly. He stole everything from you. Your company, your invention, your money, your identity. And he's been keeping you drugged and confused so you'd never figure it out." I stared at the evidence surrounding me, my entire life laid out in photographs and legal documents and timestamps. "Why?" I whispered. "Why not just kill me? Why go through all this?" Simone's expression was grim. "Because you survived the first attempt, and a second accident would look suspicious. So he found another way. He killed Dr. Nicole David and created this version of you instead. Dependent, confused, harmless." She leaned forward. "But you're remembering now, which means you're becoming dangerous again. And Nicole, I think he knows." The first memory hit me like a freight train. I was standing in Simone's presence, staring at the forged signature, and suddenly I wasn't in my apartment anymore. I was at an MIT mixer 6 years ago, wearing a black cocktail dress I'd bought to celebrate my first major research grant. A man approached me at the bar, handsome, charming, with salt and pepper hair and a smile that seemed genuine. "Dr. David," he said, extending his hand. "Joe Wellington. I'm a business consultant specializing in biotech startups. I've heard incredible things about your work." But that wasn't right. The memory flickered, split, showed me the truth underneath the lie. Joe wasn't a business consultant. He was a failed day trader who'd burned through 2 family fortunes and was desperately looking for his next mark. He'd researched me, targeted me, engineered our meeting down to the smallest detail. The pain hit next. A migraine so intense I collapsed onto my knees, clutching my head as Simone rushed to my side. The memories were coming too fast, colliding with 3 years of false narratives Joe and Chelsea and Dr. Rahman had carefully constructed. Our whirlwind romance, 6 weeks from meeting to proposal. His insistence we marry quickly before I changed my mind. How he'd moved into my house, started managing my finances, slowly isolated me from colleagues who made him feel inadequate. I remembered defending my PhD thesis while he sulked in the audience because the attention wasn't on him. Remembered him forgetting to tell me about important investor meetings. Remembered the growing resentment in his eyes every time someone called me doctor. Another memory sharper now. Coming home early from the lab 2 weeks before the accident and finding Chelsea in my kitchen, her lipstick smeared, her shirt buttoned wrong. Joe coming down the stairs in his undershirt. Their practiced excuses. Chelsea had spilled wine. Joe was just helping her clean up. The way I'd wanted so desperately to believe them, because the alternative was too painful. But I had known. Deep down, I'd known. I remembered making an appointment with a divorce lawyer. Remembered telling Joe I wanted out, that I knew about the affair, that he would get nothing from me because we had a prenup that protected my intellectual property. I remembered his face going cold, that vein in his temple pulsing, and his voice calm, measured, terrifying, saying, "You'll regret this, Nicole. I've given you everything." And then the final memory, the one that made me scream. The morning of the accident. Joe bringing me coffee in my home office, kissing my forehead, telling me he'd been thinking about what I said, and maybe we should try couples therapy first. Me, desperate to save something that was already dead, agreeing. Taking a sip of the coffee. My mouth going numb. Trying to speak, but my tongue wouldn't work. Joe's face above me, no longer loving, just calculating. "I'm sorry," he'd said, and he'd sounded almost sincere. "But I've invested too much time in you to walk away with nothing." Then nothing. Blackness. Until I'd woken up in a hospital 3 days later with Joe holding my hand, crying theatrical tears, telling me I'd been in a terrible accident, telling me I'd been drinking, something I never did, and had crashed my car, telling me I might never be the same. The seizure took me then, my body convulsing as present and past warred for dominance in my brain. I was vaguely aware of Simone calling 911, of Marcus Chin appearing. When had he arrived? And holding my head so I wouldn't hurt myself. Of voices saying benzodiazepine withdrawal, and traumatic brain injury, and she needs a real doctor now. When I woke up, I was in a hospital bed with a neurologist standing over me. Dr. Sarah Kim, her badge red. She had kind eyes but a grim expression. "Ms. David," she said gently, "you have traces of long-term benzodiazepine use in your system consistent with chronic administration over multiple years. You're experiencing acute withdrawal, which is causing the seizures. But there's something else." She pulled up brain scans on a monitor. "You have evidence of traumatic brain injury. Here and here. The damage pattern is consistent with being struck in the head with a blunt object, not with a car accident. Someone hurt you very badly, Ms. David. And then someone kept you medicated, so you'd never remember it. I spent 3 days in the hospital while Dr. Kim supervised my withdrawal from the benzodiazepines that had been poisoning my system. During those 3 days, my memories didn't just return. They flooded back with a clarity that was almost painful. I remembered my parents. Dr. James David, tall and gentle, who'd taught me to love science by turning our kitchen into a laboratory when I was 8. Dr. Sarah David, brilliant and fierce, who'd told me on my 16th birthday that I had the mind to change the world if I was brave enough to use it. They'd been renowned chemists, pioneers in neural regeneration research, working on treatments that could repair damaged brain tissue. They died in a lab fire when I was 19, just before I started my PhD at MIT. The official report said faulty electrical wiring. Their lab had burned to the ground with them inside. I remembered crying at their funeral, remembered my father's colleague Dr. Patterson telling me they'd left me everything. $12 million in life insurance and investment accounts, plus all their research notes on neural regeneration. I remembered promising myself I'd finish their work, that I'd make their deaths mean something. And I had. NeuroRestore was built on their foundation, their theories, their life's work. It had always been a family legacy. The memory of that inheritance hit me like ice water. $12 million. I grabbed my phone with shaking hands and called Ray Kowalski. "The inheritance from my parents," I said the moment he answered. I need you to find out what happened to it. He called back 6 hours later, while I was being discharged from the hospital. Marcus was driving me to a safe house Simone had arranged. We all agreed I couldn't go back to my apartment. Not now that I was remembering. Nicole. Ray's voice was tight with controlled anger. The account was drained. Every penny. Withdrawn over the past 4 years through a series of wire transfers and cashier's checks. All signed by Nicole David. Let me guess, I said, my voice hollow. The signatures are forged. Ray's pause told me everything. They matched the signature on the patent transfer. Same person forged both. And Nicole, there's more. I started digging into your parents' deaths like you asked. The lab fire was ruled accidental, but there was an insurance investigation. The insurance company thought something was off. The fire started in 3 separate locations simultaneously, which is unusual for electrical failure. But the investigation was dropped abruptly after a large payout was made to settle the claim. My blood went cold. How large? $800,000. Paid 6 years ago to a consulting firm called Wellington Advisory Services. The owner of record, Joe Wellington. I finished, my hands clenching into fists. 6 years ago. 2 months before I met him at that MIT mixer. 2 months before he'd introduced himself as a business consultant who'd heard incredible things about my work. Marcus pulled the car over because I was hyperventilating. Simone, in the passenger seat, turned to look at me with an expression that mirrored my own horror. He's been planning this for 6 years, I whispered. Since before I even met him. He knew about my parents, knew about their research, knew about the inheritance. He didn't just steal my life. He engineered the whole thing from the beginning. The implications crashed over me in waves. Had Joe known my parents? Had he been involved in their deaths? The timing was too perfect. The investigation dropped right before he entered my life, the insurance payout going to his shell company, his immediate interest in my work on neural regeneration. I thought about my mother's final research notes, the ones I'd used to stabilize the neural restore compound. I'd found them in a safety deposit box after her death. But what if there had been more? What if Joe had gotten to the lab before it burned? We need to find out everything about that fire, I said, my voice steadier now, fueled by a rage so pure it burned away the last of the fog. Every detail, every person involved, every dollar that changed hands. Simone was already typing on her laptop. On it. But Nicole, if he's been planning this for 6 years, if he was involved in your parents' deaths. She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't have to. If Joe had killed my parents to get access to their research, to get access to me, then he'd already proven he was willing to murder for what he wanted. And now I was the only thing standing between him and complete ownership of a $4.7 billion empire built on my family's legacy. I wasn't just a loose end. I was the biggest threat to everything he'd built, which meant he was already planning how to eliminate me. Permanently this time. The envelope arrived at Simone's safe house 3 days later, delivered by courier. Expensive cream-colored paper, my name written in Joe's precise handwriting. Inside, an embossed invitation to the Wellington Pharma Annual Investor Gala, scheduled for 3 weeks from now at the Grandmont Hotel. Below the formal details, a handwritten note. Dear Nicole, I hope you'll attend as my guest, as a courtesy to the woman who supported me through the early days. I know our marriage ended painfully, but I'd like to part as friends. Warmly, Joe. I read it 3 times while Simone looked over my shoulder, her expression darkening with each word. It's a trap, she said flatly. He's going to kill you there. Marcus, who'd been staying at the safe house to help coordinate our investigation, took the invitation from my hands and studied it carefully. Why would he risk something so public? There'll be 300 investors, board members, media coverage. Because that's exactly why it'll work, I interrupted, my memory sharpening with each passing day. I remembered Joe's patterns now, his calculated charm, the way he always hid in plain sight. A suicide, the depressed divorcee who couldn't handle losing everything, who jumped from a balcony at her ex-husband's moment of triumph. Tragic, sympathetic even. He'd probably give a tearful speech about mental health awareness. Ray's call came an hour later, confirming my worst fears. I got the building plans for the Grandmont, he said without preamble. There's a VIP balcony on the 3rd floor overlooking the ballroom. I found notes in the margin of Joe's personal copy. He requested access to the architectural plans 2 weeks ago. Someone wrote balcony railing, reduce bolts to 2 in what looks like his handwriting. The rage that filled me was clean and cold and clarifying. Joe had been planning my murder while I was still signing divorce papers at Chelsea's wedding. Probably longer. This was always how it was going to end, with my body broken at the bottom of an elegant venue while he played the grieving ex-husband. Then we have 3 weeks, I said, looking at the faces around me. Simone with her cameras and evidence, Marcus with his legal expertise and devotion to saving his sister, Ray with his investigator's instincts. 3 weeks to build an airtight case against him. But I had something else too, something Joe didn't know about. In the quiet hours at the safe house, while my brain healed from years of poisoning, I'd been working. My mother's research notes, the ones Joe had never found, contained the final piece of the NeuroRestore puzzle. A way to make the treatment more effective, more stable, more revolutionary. NeuroRestore 2.0. I'd finished it 2 days ago. I pulled out my laptop and showed them the completed research, the breakthrough that would render Joe's stolen version obsolete. We go to the gala, I said quietly. We let him think I'm still broken, still confused, still the easy victim he created. And then, in front of every investor and board member who matters, we show them exactly who Dr. Nicole David really is. Simone's smile was sharp as a blade. Biblical reckoning. I thought about my parents, about Rebecca Chin medicated in a facility, about 3 years of my life stolen. Exactly. The woman who walked into the Grandmont Hotel ballroom that night bore no resemblance to the trembling ghost who'd signed divorce papers 3 weeks earlier. I'd spent 2 hours getting ready, recreating Dr. Nicole David from old photographs. Hair in a sleek blowout, makeup professionally applied, wearing a crimson dress that cost $8,000 and fit like armor. My mother's sapphire pendant rested against my collarbone, the only thing Joe had never found to steal. I looked like money. I looked like power. I looked like someone who knew exactly who she was. The ballroom fell silent as I entered. 300 investors, board members, and pharmaceutical executives turned to stare. And there, near the stage where he'd been preparing to give his keynote address, stood Joe Wellington. The color drained from his face so completely I thought he might faint. Beside him, Chelsea, visibly pregnant in a pale pink gown that emphasized her condition, looked confused, her hand instinctively moving to her belly. I walked through the crowd with my head high, every eye following me, whispers erupting in my wake. Simone had positioned cameras throughout the venue, and I knew Marcus was backstage with the FBI agents we'd briefed yesterday. Ray stood near the balcony, the one with the sabotaged railing, documenting every detail. Joe recovered his composure with practiced ease, that rehearsed smile sliding into place. "Nicole," he said warmly, approaching with open arms like we were old friends. "I'm so glad you could make it. You look incredible." I stepped past his embrace and walked directly to the stage. Took the microphone from the podium before he could stop me. "Good evening," I said, my voice clear and steady, amplified through speakers that reached every corner of the ballroom. "My name is Dr. Nicole David." The room went absolutely silent. 6 years ago, I created NeuroRestore in my parents' laboratory, using research they died developing. 4 years ago, I founded this company to bring their life's work to the world. 3 years ago, my husband tried to murder me. And tonight, I'm taking it all back. The chaos that erupted was immediate. Gasps, shouts, investors rising from their seats. Joe was moving toward me, but Marcus appeared, blocking his path. Security guards I'd hired personally surrounded the stage. I nodded to Simone, and the venue screens flickered to life. First, the patent applications, original and forged, my real signature compared to Joe's clumsy forgeries. The timestamps showing the transfers happened 1 month after my accident. Then the accident report, alongside Dr. Kim's medical testimony about traumatic brain injury, consistent with being struck in the head, not a car accident. Chelsea's pharmacy records appeared next, years of benzodiazepine purchases mapped against the timeline of my memory loss. Rebecca's face filled the screens then, video conferenced live from Oregon with her lawyer and Marcus's legal team. "My name is Rebecca Chun," she said, her voice shaking but determined. "Joe Wellington married me, stole my software code, and had me institutionalized when I tried to fight back. I'm his first victim. Nicole is his second. How many more will there be before someone stops him?" The emails between Joe and Dr. Ramon played next. Plans to keep me confused and compliant, discussions of dosage adjustments, callous references to the Nicole problem. And finally, the architectural plans with Joe's handwriting. Balcony railing, reduce bolts to 2. A maintenance worker we'd interviewed testified on video that Joe had personally requested access to the balcony 2 days ago. The FBI agents entered then, moving through the crowd with quiet efficiency. Joe saw them coming, and his mask finally cracked. "This is insane," he shouted. "She's mentally ill. She's been unstable for years, everyone knows that. Because you drugged me." I cut him off, my voice sharp enough to silence the room. "Because you tried to kill me, and when that failed, you spent 3 years systematically destroying my mind." Chelsea was crying now, mascara running down her face as an FBI agent approached her. "Joe, tell them," she pleaded. "Tell them this is crazy. Tell them about the baby." "The baby?" Joe whirled on her, his composure completely shattered. "You were just supposed to keep her medicated. You weren't supposed to get pregnant. You weren't supposed to." He stopped, realizing what he'd just admitted in front of 300 witnesses and a dozen cameras. Chelsea's scream was primal as the truth hit her. She'd never been his partner, just another tool he'd used and discarded. The FBI agents moved in simultaneously, reading them both their rights as the ballroom erupted into complete pandemonium. Investors were shouting questions. Board members were on their phones with lawyers. Journalists were frantically typing. I stood at the center of it all, finally, blessedly clear-headed, and watched the man who'd stolen everything get exactly what he deserved. I stepped back to the microphone as Joe and Chelsea were led away in handcuffs. "The original patents are being restored by court order as of 4 p.m. today," I said into the chaos. "Wellington Pharma will be restructured under my leadership and renamed David Biotech, as it should have been from the beginning. NeuroRestore 2.0 begins clinical trials next month. Every penny of profit will fund the Rebecca Chin Foundation for survivors of intimate partner fraud." I looked directly at Joe as the agents pushed him toward the exit. "As for the $4.7 billion you stole, I'm donating your half to brain injury research. Seems fitting." I walked off that stage, past the balcony with its sabotaged railing that would have been my grave, and out into the rest of my life. 6 months later, I stood in my laboratory. My real laboratory, the one I'd built with my parents' legacy and my own brilliant mind. Teaching a class of young female scientists about neural regeneration and the importance of protecting your work. Rebecca stood at the back of the room, healthy now, clear-eyed, serving as my CTO and building security systems to protect everything we created. Marcus managed our finances as CFO with a devotion born from saving his sister. And Simone's Pulitzer-winning exposé, titled "The Women Joe Wellington Tried to Erase," had sparked a national conversation about intimate partner fraud and medical abuse. I still had scars. The one above my eyebrow from where Joe had struck me. The psychological wounds that therapy was slowly healing. But I also had something Joe could never take from me again. The absolute certainty of who I was. Dr. Nicole David. Daughter of James and Sarah. Creator of NeuroRestore. Survivor. And finally, after 3 years of living in someone else's nightmare, completely and utterly free. I stood at my laboratory window that evening after class, watching the sun set over the city, and thought about that woman who'd signed divorce papers with trembling hands at a wedding reception. She'd believed she was nobody. She'd believed the lies they fed her. She'd almost let them win. If you've stayed with me through this entire journey, thank you. Truly. Your time means everything, and I hope Nicole's story reminded you that no matter how lost you feel, no matter how many people try to rewrite your truth, your real self is still in there waiting to be reclaimed. If this story moved you, if it made you angry or inspired or grateful for your own clarity of mind, I'd be so honored if you'd hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. Sharing Nicole's story helps it reach other people who might need to hear it. People who are living in fog and don't yet realize someone put it there. And I'm genuinely curious. Where did you watch this from? What city or state are you in right now? Drop it in the comments. I love knowing where our community is, and honestly, your comments and support are what make telling these stories worthwhile. Remember, you're not who they say you are. You're who you know yourself to be. And that truth, nobody can ever really take that away. Thank you for being here. Until the next story. Stay sharp, stay aware, and never stop questioning the narrative someone else tries to write for your life.